All right, welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something I think we all deal with, and that's stress.
Sure.
We've got a couple of sources here. We've got the CDC Guide to Stress Management,
Okay.
and then some insights from the Cleveland Clinic on how stress and our emotional health, kind of how they're all connected.
Yeah.
So, are you ready to kind of unpack this with me today?
Always ready for a good stress debrief.
Ah,
I think it's really interesting how much research is out there now on something that we kind of used to just brush off.
totally. And the first thing that kind of jumps out to me looking at both of these sources is this idea that stress isn't always bad.
Yeah.
Like, we're kind of conditioned to think of it as like, "Ugh, stress, bad." Like it's a negative thing.
Right. It's got a real PR problem stressed out.
Totally, yeah.
The CDC actually points out that short-term stress can be helpful.
Really?
Yeah, it can kind of boost our focus and our problem-solving skills.
Mhm.
It's that chronic, long-term, long-haul stress that we really need to understand and manage.
So it's like if I have a deadline coming up, a little stress can help me like power through and get it done.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if I'm feeling overwhelmed all the time, that's when we run into problems.
That's when it becomes an issue.
Yeah. And both sources, they get pretty real about the effects of that kind of chronic stress, like what it actually does to us.
Yeah, they do. It's a full body experience. The Cleveland Clinic, they list out all of these physical symptoms
Oh, yeah.
from, the obvious ones like headaches and sleep problems.
Yeah, you hear about that all the time.
But to more serious things like, increased risk of heart issues,
Oh, I see.
high blood pressure.
I was surprised that they even mentioned digestive problems as a potential consequence of chronic stress.
Yeah,
It really kind of makes you realize, like, how deeply this can impact us.
absolutely. And it's not just physical, right?
Yeah.
Both sources talk about the toll it takes on our mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah, for sure.
Anxiety, depression, difficulty concentrating. It really throws a wrench in all our mental gears.
It's like a domino effect, right? You're
Yeah.
stressed, so you can't sleep.
Yeah.
And you're not sleeping well, so you're more irritable.
Yeah.
And then, more prone to anxiety and yeah.
It just keeps going. And the Cleveland Clinic actually makes this kind of chilling point
Okay.
about how unmanaged stress can push people toward unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Oh, wow.
Things like substance abuse or disordered eating.
That's scary.
It really is a stark reminder of why this stress management thing is so important.
Okay. So we've established that stress is a powerful force. It can be good, it can be bad.
For sure.
But the good news is both the CDC and the Cleveland Clinic offer a ton of strategies for managing it effectively.
Yeah.
And they kind of break things down into these neat categories.
Right.
Mind, body, and cognitive techniques.
Yeah. It's a really helpful framework, I think.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with those mind strategies?
Okay.
What jumped out at you from the sources?
I've always had a hard time with meditation, but both sources really emphasize these mindfulness techniques.
Hmm.
I was intrigued by this thing that the CDC suggested, box breathing. Have you ever heard of that?
I have, yeah.
Like you inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold again for 4.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried that?
I have. It's surprisingly effective for calming that nervous system down,
Hmm.
and the science backs it up.
Oh, really?
Both sources talk about how deep, controlled breathing can help regulate our heart rate
Wow.
and lower blood pressure.
That's amazing.
It's like a direct line to calming that stress response.
That makes so much sense. And speaking of calming down, the CDC also suggested something I think we could all use a little bit more of.
Yeah,
Taking breaks from the news and social media,
yeah.
all that constant, like, negative stuff. I know I find myself doom scrolling way too often.
It's a real issue.
Yeah.
Our brains aren't really wired to process that much negativity and information overload.
Right. Yeah.
So the sources suggest, replacing some of that screen time with activities that nurture, our mental well-being.
Okay. Yeah.
Things like spending time in nature, practicing gratitude, or connecting with loved ones.
I love that the Cleveland Clinic even advocates for laughter therapy.
Yeah.
Sometimes a good laugh is all you need, right?
Yeah.
Just to shift your perspective.
Laughter triggers the release of endorphins.
Really?
Yeah, which have mood-boosting and pain-relieving effects.
Yeah.
It's like nature's stress antidote.
So we've talked about mindful breathing, disconnecting from, the digital world,
Right.
and embracing the power of laughter.
Yeah.
All great strategies for calming that mind aspect of stress.
Right, but managing stress is a holistic thing.
Yeah.
So let's move on to those body strategies.
Okay.
And let's explore how our physical health kind of plays into all of this.
Okay, let's dive into that. Okay, so we've got these amazing mind strategies, but I'm curious about what the sources say about the body aspect of stress. It just makes sense that taking care of our physical health would kind of help us manage stress better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Both sources really highlight how interconnected our physical and mental well-being are. It's not just about, feeling good. It's
Mhm.
about how our body actually responds to stress on a physiological level.
Right, like that whole fight or flight response everyone talks about.
Exactly. When we're stressed out all the time, our bodies are pumping out all these hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which can really do a number on our systems over time. And the CDC actually goes into some detail about this, emphasizing that regular exercise can actually help regulate those stress hormones.
I'm seeing that in both sources, actually. The Cleveland Clinic calls exercise a natural stress reliever
Hmm.
because it helps us burn off that excess energy and tension. It's like we're literally moving the stress out of our bodies.
I like that. That's a great way to think about it. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy intense. The CDC suggests aiming for at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic activity each week. So that could be like brisk walking, swimming, dancing, whatever gets you moving.
And it's not just exercise, right? Both sources talk about how important sleep is.
Oh, for sure. Sleep is huge.
The CDC specifically recommends adults get at least 7 hours of sleep per night.
Yeah. Sleep is when our bodies repair and recharge. And it's crucial for regulating our hormones, consolidating memories, just giving our systems a break. When we're sleep deprived, our stress response is heightened, and we're just much more susceptible to feeling overwhelmed.
It's like sleep is our secret weapon in the fight against stress.
It really is. The CDC also emphasizes the importance of a balanced diet,
Okay.
and they talk about how certain foods, like those rich in omega-3 fatty acids, can actually help reduce inflammation and support brain health, which is, key for stress management.
So basically, fueling our bodies with good stuff helps us handle stress better.
Exactly. Makes sense, right?
It does.
And both sources are pretty clear about the things we should be limiting. Things like alcohol, caffeine, and processed foods, all of which can actually exacerbate stress and disrupt sleep.
Okay, so we've covered the mind strategies and now the body strategies. What about those cognitive techniques? I feel like those are often overlooked when it comes to stress management.
Yeah, you're right. They are often overlooked, and they're really important. These are the strategies that help us kind of change the way we think about and respond to stress.
Okay, so what are some of the specific cognitive strategies that the sources recommend?
Well, one that both sources highlight is journaling.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the Cleveland Clinic suggests keeping a stress journal where you track your stress levels, identify your triggers, and note what coping mechanisms work best for you.
That's so interesting. It's like you become a detective for your own stress.
Exactly. It helps you gain that awareness of your own personal patterns and develop your own personalized strategies for managing your stress. Another cognitive technique that came up is something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Oh, I've heard of CBT. Isn't that a type of therapy?
It is. And the Cleveland Clinic specifically recommends it as a really effective approach for managing stress. Essentially, what CBT does is it helps you identify and challenge those negative thought patterns that are contributing to your stress and anxiety.
So it's about reframing those unhelpful thoughts into something more positive and manageable.
Exactly. It's a super powerful tool for shifting your perspective and developing healthier coping mechanisms.
Wow, that's fascinating. Are there any other cognitive strategies that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, well, both sources talk about the importance of time management.
Uh-huh.
The CDC suggests creating a schedule, setting realistic goals, and breaking down large tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Yeah, time management always seems to come up. But I guess it makes sense. Feeling overwhelmed by a never-ending to-do list is definitely a major stressor.
Absolutely. And the Cleveland Clinic adds a really interesting point about learning to say no more often.
Hmm.
We often take on too much, which can lead to burnout and resentment. Setting those boundaries and prioritizing our own well-being is really crucial.
You know what I'm getting from all of this is that stress management isn't just about those quick fixes or relaxation techniques. It's about taking a holistic approach and making conscious choices that really support our well-being on all those different levels, mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about creating a sustainable lifestyle that promotes resilience and equips us to kind of handle life's inevitable challenges.
No. So it's not about eliminating stress altogether, which is probably impossible,
Right.
but about changing our relationship with it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that stress is a part of life, but it doesn't have to control our lives. We have the power to choose how we respond to it, and we have so many resources out there available to support us.
I love that. It's empowering to realize that we're not just victims of stress, but active participants in how we experience it.
Totally. And that actually brings us to another crucial point that both the CDC and Cleveland Clinic emphasize: the importance of personalized stress management.
Personalized stress management, what do you mean by that?
Well, what works for one person might not work for another. We all have different triggers, different coping styles, different needs.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. The key is to find what works best for you. And it might be a combination of different techniques, and it might take some experimentation.
I think that's really empowering message. It means we have the agency to kind of create our own stress management toolkit, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we understand about stress and how it affects us, the better equipped we are to manage it effectively.
So what does this all mean for our listeners out there?
It means that stress is a part of life, but it doesn't have to control our lives.
Yeah.
We have the power to choose how we respond to stress, and we have a wealth of resources out there available to support us.
You know, it's interesting. As we're talking about all this, it makes me think about those like sneaky little stressors that we might not even be aware of.
Oh, yeah,
The ones that just kind of build up gradually over time
for sure.
and just like chip away at our sense of peace.
Absolutely. Those everyday hassles, they can really add up. Things like, a long commute or a really cluttered inbox, or even just the constant, barrage of notifications on our phones.
Yeah.
CDC actually calls those daily hassles,
Okay.
and they can be just as bad for us as like a major life event.
It's so true. I never really thought about those things as contributing to my overall stress levels, but when you put it that way, it makes sense.
Right.
It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, exactly. And the Cleveland Clinic highlights how these, seemingly minor stressors can trigger the same physiological stress response as those bigger issues. So even if we're not consciously freaking out, our bodies are still reacting, releasing those stress hormones, putting us on high alert.
So what can we do about it? I mean, we can't exactly eliminate traffic or make our inboxes magically disappear.
You're right, we can't. But we can find ways to kind of mitigate their impact. The CDC suggests things like creating a calming morning routine, set a positive tone for the day,
Okay.
or building in some buffer time between appointments so we're not always feeling so rushed,
Right.
and setting those boundaries around work and technology to try and, prevent that burnout.
I love that idea of a calming morning routine. Like,
Yeah.
instead of hitting the ground running, maybe starting the day with some mindful breathing or a cup of tea or even a few minutes of journaling.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about being proactive and creating that space for ourselves to de-stress and recharge.
Yeah.
And both sources emphasize how important it is to prioritize self-care.
Yeah.
And that could be anything from taking a nice, relaxing bath to reading a good book, spending time with loved ones.
So it's about giving ourselves permission to do things that nourish our minds and bodies.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's just about saying no to things, things that drain our energy
Right.
or add unnecessary stress to our lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into stress management, I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. It's about taking ownership. It's not about waiting for stress to happen and reacting to it. It's about actively shaping our lives to minimize those stressors and create a sense of calm and control.
I couldn't agree more. It's about empowering ourselves with the knowledge, building a toolkit of effective strategies, and being mindful of those, like you said, those sneaky everyday stressors.
Yeah.
That can really chip away at our well-being.
And just remembering that stress is a normal part of life, but we don't have to let it control us. We have the power to choose how we respond. And like you've been saying, we have so many resources out there that are available to support us.
Absolutely. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to try out these strategies, find what works best for you, and keep diving deep. Keep learning about stress management.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep taking care of yourselves.